All right, everybody. We are here again with a special guest, Jayant Bhandari, who is a world traveler and advisor to institutional investors. And he puts on this conference every year, which I've watched some films or some videos of on YouTube. You probably have as well, for Capitalism and Morality Conference. So, Jayant, you're in India today. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, Matthew.
We have a lot to talk about, and I think starting with the fact that you're in India today, and you were telling us before we started about some of the experiences of COVID that you're seeing around you in India. Tell us more about that.
So Matthew, I have spent about 6 months in the last 1 year in India. I got stuck when I came in March last year for 4 months, and then I managed to escape India on a repatriation flight to the US. And now I have been back for 2.5 months in India, and the situation is very crazy here. Indians were extraordinarily proud about the fact that an Indian company, which was actually financed by an American company, developed a vaccine. And Indian cases actually deteriorated to virtually nothing, about 10,000 cases a day. So Indians were very proud that there was something great about the Indian culture or Indian food system that enabled Indians to get well from COVID. But over the last 1 month, the number of cases are going up exponentially. And the very sad thing is that Indian Prime Minister on a certain day in March declared a complete curfew in the country for about 2 months, a complete curfew, which meant that you were not allowed to leave your homes even if you wanted to buy or sell groceries. So he was too stupid to realize that people still needed to eat. After a couple of days, he realized that he had to let people go out to buy food. And basically, when people went out, the police beat them up very badly, which continues today. I mean, you can watch videos of it. It's all over Twitter. Everywhere in the country, across the country, particularly if you're poor, if you leave home, the police will beat you into pulp before they ask you questions. And you might be going to a hospital, you might be going there to buy groceries. Now, people have been asked to walk to the hospital if they were sick, and they were asked to leave their taxis. That's how the bad situation is. Now, this is a man-made crisis. Now, after a full 1 year of COVID situation in which they have completely destroyed the economies, there are beggars all over, there's poverty, people are desperate for jobs. They have not even managed to straighten up the medical system. So on a normal day before COVID hit, there would be normally 2 or 3 people on a single bed in a government hospital. And the situation is worse today. There are people all over the place. You can't get oxygen. A lot of people in one particular hospital in Mumbai, 19 people died within an hour because of lack of oxygen. So they have no oxygen. COVID medicine have disappeared from the market because either people are hoarding or people are buying them in advance to avoid running short of those medicine. Now in India, you can actually go to a pharmacy and buy whatever you want to. You don't really need a prescription. So medicine have disappeared. Some of the medicines are available for about $150 a tablet. Now understand this thing that the GDP per capita of this country is about $2,000 a year, which means that a lot of people are going bankrupt. Hospitals have no discipline. It's a completely corrupt system. Indians go to the hospital to die and to go bankrupt, and they charge you an American rates these days to hospitalize you. That's the situation today.
Well, I saw a Twitter post that you did recently, and everyone, I encourage you to follow Jayant on Twitter because he posts lots of interesting things. But Jayant, you posted a video of inside a hospital in India, and I don't know where this was, but it was just total mayhem. It was crazy.
So Matthew, if anyone who has ever come to India knows that from the moment your flight lands into India until the time you depart in India, it is complete mayhem. India is a mayhem anyway. There is not a moment of peace or a moment without chaos in this country. It's an extremely irrational and tribalistic society. And the reason why everything is based on might is right. It's not based on reasoning or discussion. Everything is you crowd around, you assert your might, and that's how you get ahead in this society.
Interesting. And so these farmers riots that have happened in India recently.
Can't you overcome that?
Go ahead, Doug.
Oh, I was just going to ask Jayant, isn't it possible to overcome, though? I mean, if you're well-dressed and obvious Westerner and have money and so forth, you can avoid these things then if you're in India, I presume.
No, you cannot. You have to be if you are rich, and if you're just rich, they will actually fleece you and still kill you. So if you go to a hospital with a lot of money, they will take your money, but they will treat you for all kinds of problems and they will kill you. That is why, Doug, you have to understand, medical tourism completely failed in this country. The world was euphoric about India developing medical tourism. If it never really took off. Now you have to be astute along with your money. You can't just bribe in this country and win in the game. Otherwise, a lot of people would bribe. The only way you can win in this country and survive in this country is by being streetwise and by being very astute. You have to protect your money from not just outsider, but from your friends and family as well. That's the way the society works here.
From your friends and family as well.
Oh, absolutely, Matthew. This is a zero trust based society. There's no concept of trust. There's no concept of honesty and integrity. There's no concept of honor in the society. These are the things I really saw for the first time when I went to study in the UK. Those concepts don't exist here at all.
Well, and is this the basis of the Capitalism and Morality Conference? Because it's a philosophical conference, really, that you do every year in Vancouver, right?
Well, Matthew, when I arrived in the UK 30 years back, I had crossed into a different universe. I realized that I had come into a completely different culture where people behaved differently, they thought differently. The mental operating system of those people was different in the United Kingdom. It took me about 2 years. I was hungry, I was broke, I was close to homeless for a long time. But those were the best 2 years of my life because I saw for the first time humanity and compassion in society. Now, I don't really care anymore if someone opens the door for me these days in San Francisco, for example, but those were the days when it was impressive for me that someone could open a door for you and keep it open for you. The reason I started running Capitalism and Morality 10 years back was because I wanted to remind Western people what a precious thing they have, the Western civilization, the whole idea that came together in the United Kingdom in the 18th and 17th and 19th century, the capitalism, the concept of honor, a way of working with people which made human beings for the first time different from animals. Now, Western society was extraordinarily lucky to get that. And I have seen over particularly the last 15 years, that this is going away in the Western society. Western society is becoming very politically correct, increasingly irrational, what we now call woke culture. These are tribalistic, materialistic people similar to the ones I see in India. And that's why they actually quite like people from the third world, the woke people in the United States. So I started this seminar because I wanted to remind people what a precious thing they are losing if they don't stop this bleeding of the Western society. And I'm talking about not financial bleeding, but cultural bleeding that is happening, because people are losing touch with this only thing that makes us human, the Western civilization, the only civilization I've known.
And what is that thing that makes us human? If in a nutshell, what would you call that?
Well, Matthew, this is, so, you go back to 200, 250 years back, Scottish and English philosophers started talking about, there was this concept of honor, and the concept of honor existed among German barbarians as well. There was a huge concept of honor, and they, over 2 millennia, they created a system of working where you trusted your people, you spoke the truth. Now, Matthew, I did not know that you would speak the truth for the sake of speaking the truth until I came to the UK. Okay, so that's the kind of how unique these things are, which to a Western person looks just everyday normal thing. But these are unique things which came together in the United Kingdom, which created the what we now call capitalism, which sounds such a materialistic word, but it isn't materialistic at all. It's a very spiritual word, because it's a way for the society to function, for the way the individual to function, and that is what created the difference between the Western society, particularly the English society and the Scottish society, compared to what we have, where I am today.
Interesting. I hate to stereotype groups of people because, I think it's always risky, but, I've done a lot of offshore software development and hired contractors all over the world. And one of the things, I wouldn't have thought of this unless you said it, but one of the things when I worked with a lot of Indians, what I found was that they would always tell me what I wanted to hear. They would always tell me what I wanted to hear, even if they'd like, oh yeah, the project will be done. It'll be done tomorrow. Yeah, just as planned. And then tomorrow would pass and you'd realize, that I wasn't ready.
Yeah, well, again, the concept of commitment is again not there, and this is again a whole package of Western civilization. The concept of commitment is not there. Concept of honor is not there. The concept of quality of work is not here. So we have a fleet of servants here, but I still have to give a final rinse to my glass, and the reason is that no one does his work properly. It is supposed to be sort of feminine, girlish in a negative sense, to be doing a proper clean job. People they don't want to look clean because it takes away the macho-ness in their mind. And this is the problem of this country. The work ethic is very non-existent. You have to constantly remind people about very, very simple things. The concept of time is not there. And you have to stereotype in a way, because otherwise you can't really survive.
Well, Doug has often talked about how Western civilization is really dying, that we're really on the ropes right now. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with that, Matthew, and I'm particularly pessimistic about the United States and Canada. And the problem is that the spine of society is its culture. And that culture is what we just talked about: the concept of honor, the concept of self-responsibility, the concept of not begging, the concept of feeling proud, concept of producing your own for your own consumption, looking after your wives and children and being responsible for them. All those things are going away now very rapidly in the United States. In fact, for the last 1 year, every single riot in the United States has happened to so-called defend some criminal. Every single person who got killed by the police was a horrible criminal, and they actually did not protest against for those black people who were actually good guys, who were like that policeman who tried to defend his friend's property after George Floyd accident happened. So the sad thing is that the Western civilization is very rapidly losing touch with its core values. And this woke culture is nothing but third world culture coming into the Western society. Now, this is not communism, this is not socialism. This is something very different. Socialism and communism was about fighting for something when people were really wretched, poor, oppressed during the early part of the last century in Russia and China. The woke people, they have all the food they want, they have all the alcohol and drugs they want, they have all the sex they want. They just want more and more free stuff. They are feral people, and this is a completely different culture. And particularly, Matthew, when America actually gives more freedom to people than any other country, it actually pampers people of color, it pampers Black people, it pampers women. It's the most pampering society in the world, and it's still this woke culture is breeding like rabbits in the United States today.
The idea that woke culture is third world culture rather than communist or socialist or Marxist or something like that is a very interesting idea. I'd never heard that before.
Well, yeah, because you see, Marxists and socialists at least had the first base right. They wanted end of oppression. They were entrenched interest in the intelligentsia those days, and there were a few. They were naive and simplistic in their approach and thinking, but at least they had thought through something. These people have not read a book or an article in their lives. They have no clue about anything. They think they have come to the end of history. They understand how the world should work going forward. I mean, Doug recently wrote an article, and I wrote an article about how absurd America has become in a country where colored people and women are constantly pampered, that now they are going absolutely crazy about hiring women and people of color in positions of management. Now, there's no need for that. Keep meritocracy in your system. And that is, again, a very Western value, meritocracy. Here in this country where I am today is nepotism. Nepotism and bribery and corruption. The system runs on that fuel.
Doug mentioned... Go ahead, Doug.
I was just going to say, I really enjoy going to Capitalism and Morality every year in Vancouver, Jayant. The speeches there are just uniformly spectacular. I mean,
Thank you.
They really are good. So, no, it's wonderful hearing you say these things because this really ought to be transcribed into a long article because you're making a lot of really good points. Is there any hope for India if withdraws capital and withdraws?
There is absolutely no hope from this country, Doug. And not only India, I have been to India about 100 times in the last 30 years. And that has given me a perspective on India. Every time I go and return back to India, I get new understanding, new nuances about this country. There's absolutely no hope. The British left a set of institutions and a framework for this society to operate under. And that framework and those institutions have been falling apart by the day. And now we have a prime minister who was the first one who was born in what is non-British India. I won't call it independent India because people were more free when the British were ruling this country. Now, the country is run by junkies and idiots and morons, basically, and evil people. So this country is going to just fall apart. Now, the problem is that there is no, and I repeat this again, there's no moral consciousness in this society. And this is the problem with the third world people. They have no righteous feeling. There's no moral consciousness. Again, if you see how police beats up people, people don't defend themselves. They don't stand up for their own rights. They plead with the police. And this is invariably what you see. And Matthew, the videos that you see is similar kind of things. Police beats up people and people just happily accept that. There's no moral consciousness. There's no no moral revulsion or righteousness that they feel. Again, something very unique to the Western society and copied in East Asia. But that does not exist elsewhere. And Western people have a tendency to project their views on other people. They think that those people are oppressed. They don't feel oppressed. They don't have the moral consciousness. And as a result, Doug, this society has no spine to keep it together. It will fall into tribal society. And I would say the same about Arab countries and Africa. They are made to be tribal people. They are tribal people.
Of course, there are some Indians that have US and Canada and been very successful in the technology and financial businesses. So
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's always a bell curve of people, but the vast majority is truly non-thinking people. And I would say 80% of Indians cannot even clean a glass properly. And that is the reason, Doug, you lived in Hong Kong for many years. That is the reason why Indians can't even be employed as maids and servants in Hong Kong and Singapore, because they can't even clean things properly. They can't understand those 3 steps required to clean a glass properly. And that is why manufacturing will never happen in this country. It will never happen in Africa. Anyone who has lived in these countries for a small bit of time knows that this will never happen. Now, that is the nature of, let's say, 99% of the people. The very best Indians leave the country, and they are the people you might meet. So that is actually, that makes the situation worse, because the very best have left this country or have to leave. And if you stay in this country, you actually become corrupt, because that is the only way you can survive, because you are surrounded by morons.
Wow. I heard you say something in an interview I was listening to earlier about, you talked about Sundar Pichai, who is the CEO of Google, and him adopting sort of Indian ethics, essentially, or morality into Google. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, so I have for long thought that democracy is a horrible concept, and at least immigrants should not get the right to vote for at least 4 or 5 generations, because even though they might have very high IQ, their moral behavior is still formed in a culture that they left behind. They have a certain instincts, and they have a certain way of thinking that is still of the third world. And you can see that among Ilhan Omar and AOC or Rashida Tlaib. You can see that very publicly from some people. This tribalism keeps coming out all the time. They're intelligent people. Now, CEO of Google is a very smart guy, I'm reasonably sure. The problem is that they don't have the concept of liberty in them. The concept of liberty got created in the United Kingdom over a couple of millennia, and this does not come in society at the same time over a generation or 2. So Pacholi can be in the US. He might have, his children will grow up in the US, but the problem is that they would not have got fully marinated into the Western society, the Western civilization. And that is why they will destroy your institution, even though they are very intelligent people.
But you're obviously an exception to this rule.
Yes, but again, exceptions are exactly that, exceptions. They are the tail end of the curve. They don't define the spectrum. I cannot change the society. Now, I have said this many times in the past, and I'll repeat it again. The worst airport I have come across in the US is Atlanta Airport. I hate that airport. But I can tell you, Matthew, that in one morning in Atlanta, I can find more rational people than I have found in my whole life in India. Okay, and I'm not exaggerating at all. So this is the problem. If I went around looking for leaders to run India, I couldn't find leaders in this country. And that is a huge problem. Now, even if you found those leaders, how would you put them into positions of power? That would be the next step. But that next step is not something I want to worry about, because there are simply no leaders. There are simply not many people with moral consciousness. I know less than 10 people, I would say, in my last 53 years who have some kind of moral consciousness.
It's incredible. You said,
I'm wondering. No, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say, you mentioned earlier a thing that I thought was pretty interesting and it's worth delving into. You said democracy is a horrible concept. What do you mean by that?
Well, Matthew, democracy is not a part of Western civilization. This was not something that Western philosophers of the classical time ever thought of. The Scottish democracy gave the right to vote to, I think, only about 4% of people. When America became independent, it gave the right to vote to only, I think, about 6% people. That is not the democracy that we have today. Today is a true democracy where everyone has the right to vote. Now, the problem is that bottom 50% of the population, the most materialistic, the most amoral people end up deciding who runs your country in a democratic system. And as a result, a democratic system must be populist. They must corrode the institutions. They must destroy the moral spine of all institutions, because the most powerful institution of society is created by the masses who have no interest except in bread and circuses. And I'm talking that about even the Western people, the finest Western people you can come across. 70–80% people are only interested in their weekends and vacations and beers and what they can eat and a good kitchen and a nice lounge. They are interested in materialistic things. The concept of idea stays unique even in the Western civilization, in the best of the Western civilization, among a very small number of people. In that democracy, they will have no power because they are not populists. They are deep thinkers. They think in the long term, which means that they might impose short-term pain. So masses are not interested in their views.
Excellent explanation. Yeah.
Thank you.
One question I had earlier, let's go back to this COVID thing, Jayant. How much of it that you can see is reality, where people are dying from COVID, opposed to dying from other things, maybe with COVID attached? In other words, cases of COVID, that's one thing, but getting sick from COVID are another. Do you have any reality on what's going on in India based on that?
Yes, Doug, the problem is that I told you earlier that even during the pre-COVID days, on a hospital, a narrow single bed of hospital, there would be 2 or 3 patients in ICU. That's the way the system runs here. If you go to a government hospital, it is packed. It's a big crowd of people all the way up to the gate of the hospital. There's no medical system in this country, and the private sector is actually worse than mafia in this country. So now, with even a slight increase in the number of cases, you have nothing here. And at the same time, the greedy people are taking away all the medicine from the market. And at the same time, the leadership, the political leadership, cannot plan ahead because they're too stupid. They have extremely low IQ. They're actually arrogant bullies, nothing else. So they did not plan anything over the last 1 year. And the end result is that even if COVID-19 is nothing but a small increase in health problems, it has led to a massive increase in death rate and the hospitalization related problems. Also, Indians don't have good food habits. They eat a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of bad oil. So Indians and a lot of sugar. Every time I come to India, Indians are fatter by about half an inch. So Indian society is getting worse and worse. Again, remember, among people who are materialistic and pleasure oriented, they don't care about health because they don't think into the long term. They have no moral consciousness. They don't have a sense of self-responsibility. So they eat for now and not worry about what would happen to them 6 months from now. So the health situation was very bad here. Diabetes and cancer has been increasing in this country exponentially for the last 20 or 30 years. So COVID might have just triggered it. And I have always said that the third world, and India included, will one day just need a trigger. And it does not have to be really a game changer, but just a trigger. And COVID-19 might be a trigger which will bring Darwin to full operation in this country.
Has anyone handled the COVID situation correctly? Any country from your perspective?
Yes, actually they have. East Asians have done very well. Singaporean Prime Minister was coming on YouTube. You can go and watch his speeches. He was coming from day one. He was telling people not to be afraid, carry on their lives properly. Japan never had a lockdown. Last year, Japan death rate actually decreased by 0.7% instead of increasing. So Japan did not have any lockdown whatsoever. Taiwan, South Korea, from very beginning, they started to, because they have smart people in the government, really, again, this is the cause of destruction in the US. Affirmative policy and all kinds of wokeness has brought in a massive amount of garbage in the institutions in the Western society because they are not competent people. People in East Asia laugh at wokeness. So South Korea, Taiwan corrected that right away. China was heavy-handed for 2 months, but in August last year, when we were just waking up about COVID, China was Wuhan was having concerts and everything has been open in China for the last 8 or 9 months now. So East Asians have done a very good job compared to the Western society, but countries like India have used COVID for suicidal purposes. So there's a degree of differences. India has been absolutely crazy, stupid, moronic. I mean, you don't really have words in dictionary to describe how stupid this country has been.
Well, Doug always told me that you didn't pull any punches on your views on India, and I think that is proven true.
Matthew, the reality is that poor Indians would tell you that I am not only correct, but I use very nice words to describe India. And the problem is that so often I am in a cocoon. I am protected by my servants and chauffeurs. So I am a very rich guy compared to a normal Indian. So I don't live their life, so I can't express it with proper emotions. But if you lived in their situation, you wouldn't be able to express yourself anymore because your mind would get cooked in the smell of poop and in the harassment and the tyranny you would exist in the slums. So I am just in a sweet spot where I can still speak and still keep sanity while I watch strange things happening out in this country.
Wow. So what about
the religious? Oh,
please.
So I was just going to ask, what about the religious situation between the Hindus and the Mohammedans and other religious groups? What's happening there? Anything new?
So everyone hates everyone else in this country. And I mentioned this earlier that you can't even trust your friends and family in this country. And that is pretty much the culture. And that is why people dig holes in the ground of their houses to hide their gold and not tell their family members about it. That's how low trusting culture this is. Everyone hates everyone else. People of different languages hate each other. People of different religions hate each other. If you pay closer attention to Pakistan, Pakistan has more religious strife than India has probably today, despite the fact that they are almost 100% Muslims. So the problem is not religion, the problem is tribalism. If there were no problem of religion, they would make it up by creating sects. And that's what you have in Pakistan: Shia, Sunni, Ahmadis. In fact, Ahmadis in Pakistan are mentioned as non-Muslims in the constitution. Now, India is only 20 years behind Pakistan in terms of going completely stupid and completely crazy and completely tribal. Yes, there's religious strife in this country, but that's only a symptom, just one symptom of inherent tribalism, of an irrationality of people, because everyone fights with everyone else here.
What about the conflict on the Chinese-Indian border? We, saw a lot about that a few months ago. How serious is that, and what do you make of it?
So Matthew, in 1962, there was a war between India and China, and the reason was that a lot of that area was unpopulated area. This is a lot of that is a desert. Those days, people did not really mark boundaries on desert. It was an area that India should have negotiated with China. India declined to negotiate, and Indians and Pakistanis have this thing, a saying that we will not compromise with an inch of our space. Now, how do you define what your space is? And that is one of the big reasons why the conflict happened. China had constructed a highway between Tibet and Xinjiang. And India was claiming that area, which put that highway into a huge risk. China took over a huge part of India in 1962 and basically went back to most of the original parts, except in terms of retaining that highway area. And now China, in my view, and I know Western press does not like China, and a lot of libertarians and right-wing people don't like China either, but China does not look expansionary from what I see. China could have taken Hong Kong by through heavy-handedness. They did not do it. China, for its size, is actually quite a mellow country from what I see. Indian government has been making very arrogant statements for the last several years. They changed a law which constitutionally included what is now the highway between Tibet and Xinjiang into India. And because Kashmir so far had a special status in India, that special status was removed. And that angered China, because China has a lot of highways going through that area to Pakistan now. Now, I think India should have been ally of China. India should have allowed China the right of way to the sea. India did not do that. They had to use Pakistan to get to the sea, and that created a big problem for India. India has to be to China what Mexico is to the US. That is the ratio of GDP differences between the two countries. Now, India cannot afford to alienate China for the US. China is what can rescue India. China is what can skill and train India. But that's the only hope. And Indians have a reason to go out of their way to be friendly with China. They have gone out of their way to fight with China.
Do you see long-term conflict between India and China?
Yes, it is indeed possible, because when you do too much of posturing, what ends up happening is that someone somewhere will start a war. But remember, Matthew, one thing that, and if you pay close attention to Iran-Iraq war or the recent 2 or 3 conflicts with Pakistan, most of the deaths happened because of friendly fire. Okay. This is very interesting thing, which is not studied and analyzed properly. These people cannot run big organizations. It's as simple as that. the Indian army can kill its own people and occupy its own people, which is what it does most of the time, because it occupies Kashmir, it kills and rapes a lot of people in a lot of parts of the country where Indian troops are deployed. But when it comes to fighting with China, in 1962, Chinese were able to simply walk into India. I would not be surprised if the same thing happens again, because Chinese are disciplined people. There's a system. I've been to China tens and tens of times, and I see how they operate. There's a system of operation, how they operate. You go to your local Costco, most of the people are Chinese. And the reason is that Chinese have hardwired in them a system of operating. They can follow orders, they can deliver on those orders. Indians simply cannot do it. If I want a cup of coffee and a glass of milk, I will not tell the maid to bring the two things together, because something will go wrong. I have to ask one thing first and then second thing next. And the end result is that there will be a conflict. But India will, in my view, lose abysmally, because it will destroy itself through friendly fire, the way they have always done in the past wars as well.
That's amazing. What do you think about Doug talks about he expects some war ultimately between the US and China. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I wish American media saw China as an ally rather than as an enemy. China is no saint. China has a lot of problems, but China is a second world country, and it's one of the only countries on the planet that is actually on a path to improvement. You go to China. When I first started going to China about 13, 14 years back, there were no lineups. People were spitting on the road. I don't see that anymore, Matthew. So Chinese society is on the right track. Chinese fight for what is right, increasingly fight for what is right. So Chinese society is on a positive path, and that is good enough for me to make that society my ally rather than my enemy. But I think Western media exaggerates the negative points of China. There's not enough public evidence about, for example, the so-called cleansing happening in Xinjiang. Now, if that was actually happening, I would actually just shrug it off, because Muslim countries in Central Asia do exactly the same thing. They restrict Islam, because the moment Islam becomes the majority religion, people of that society starts copying Saudi Arabia, and things go south very quickly. So China has a reason to control Islam, to keep tabs on fanaticism and tabs on problems. Religion hasn't created as many problems in the Western society as it has outside the West. Religion is a horrible thing in this society. It becomes, in the third world and the second world place, it becomes a tool for tribalism. So Western society has to understand that China cannot destabilize itself and become Western, woke Western, which is not even Western in the true sense of the word, and then look cool. I hope China does not fall for democracy. I hope China does not fall for the pressure of Western media, because if they, for example, Hong Kong, if China had given more freedom to Hong Kong, which, I, Doug, would have loved to happen. But the problem is, if you were the president of China, would you have done that? No, because if you had done it, you would have destabilized the whole of China, because you would then have created so-called freedom movement across China. So, you have to understand it's a big country. They are on a path to progress. So, there could be easily a war with China, but for the wrong reasons, because American institutions are increasingly controlled by the woke people, the people who don't understand foreign cultures, who want to mold the foreign people in their way of thinking. And again, this has nothing to do with the classical Western civilization. This is the corruption of Western society into a woke society.
We talk about the Western morality, though. How does the Chinese morality, you see the Chinese morality having the same essence that the Western morality does?
No, not really. And that's why I don't prefer to live in China, Matthew. East Asians are, from what I see, a product of having copied cultural values from the Western society. They have been copying the West for the last 200 years. So this has started with, I think, 1860, when the Meiji Revolution happened in Japan. They actively imported German ways of doing things to Japan. Now, it takes millennia, and without exaggeration, millennia or 2 millennia to completely get marinated into the Western ways of life. So East Asia is not a Western society in a cultural sense, but it has copied and retained a lot of good things of the Western society. I go to, sometimes I go to distribute food, not out of my own charity, but just I join people to distribute food. And I constantly see that people who give out food don't want to be seen as giving out food. And people who take food hide behind doors when they take food because they still have so much honor. Again, copied from the West. So East Asia has a lot of good values that they have copied from the West. But of course, it's very difficult to copy the free thinking aspect of the Western society. But they have copied a lot of other things, and they are going to retain it for now.
And of course, they had they had Confucian values in China, which in many ways are close to the Protestant work ethic and so forth. So that's a plus. I don't know if India has a similar philosopher to. I believe it does.
Well, they do. India has created some great philosophers, Doug, but nothing sticks in this country because there is not a critical mass of people here who gain moral consciousness. Again, I remind you about the airport analogy I mentioned before. You just can't find enough rational people in India. In China, it's a much different system. You can find people who can run manufacturing plants, you can run operations. And that is the reason why India will always be India. Anyone who compares India with China is just idiotic. He has no understanding of the differences between the two countries. So India has created a lot of philosophers. India has actually had a lot of spiritual gurus, some very, very good people, but they always either had to leave the country or they died without being recognized because there's simply no critical mass here at all.
Is there who's the political philosopher or philosopher from India that's been translated into English that may not be well known to our viewers that we might want to study more?
Well, I think the Gautam Buddha, who created Buddhism, was a great philosopher, and a lot of recognition of the Eastern Indian philosophy exists today because English translated ancient Indian texts into English. Indians had forgotten most of those texts. It was English who translated those texts and brought those into recognition. There's a guy called J. Krishnamurti, who died in America, I think 20 years back or something. I thought I have listened to some of his lectures and read some of his books. I think he was a great philosopher, but he got zero success in India because in India, people want gurus who tell them what to do. Indians do not want to learn how to fish for themselves and how to think for themselves. You might find one or two people in your lifetime like that, but you will never have a critical mass in this country. Whereas when these people left for America, they were very quickly able to create a critical mass of people who would want to copy them.
What do you think about what's happening?
That's a good point. I was just going to say, you mentioned Gautama, who's better known as the Buddha. And of course, he was an Indian, but Buddhism really only caught on in China, not in India so much.
Yes, it actually caught on and it disappeared very quickly because, again, the religion, Buddhism requires a moral consciousness. Indians, look at Islam and Hinduism. Islam wants to tell you everything, everything in details. It wants to tell you how to pee and how to sit when you pee. So that is the kind of details it goes into. It does not encourage free thinking at all. Hindu religion is very open. It gives you a lot of freedom, but it's a feral religion. It has no moral boundaries. And that is why hippies loved Hinduism, because it just gives you no moral boundaries. You do what you want to do drugs, no, don't worry about the consequences. That's the kind of culture it is. But remember, anything with moral consciousness does not stick in this country. Even Christianity has become voodoo in this country. So you can go to YouTube and Google India Christianity, and you will see some strange videos about superstitious, crazy things happening in churches in this country. But that's what you see in the Caribbean as well, and Africa as well. The problem is, if you don't have as a core within the society moral consciousness, nothing good will stick. It will just become another dogma.
Where does this moral consciousness come from?
Well, again, this is something that Western civilization went through over 2 millennia, and something truly remarkable happened, Matthew. And this is something which maybe someone who grew up outside the Western civilization can see, or could see, because Western civilization has lost a lot of it in the recent past. But this is the moral consciousness that they developed over 2 millennia, the concept of reason, Christianity, and I know Doug would say Christianity might have weakened Western civilization, but I think whatever it was, I quite like Christianity as a framework which gave a framework to the society to stick moral values and certain social values together. Everything, the way things happened in 2 millennia, something truly magical happened, which probably is in contrast visible to a person who grew up in an amoral society. I call it amoral India because there's no concept of morality. People don't have the moral consciousness. So in an amoral society, if you grow up and if you wanted liberty and if you felt moral consciousness in you, you would be able to see it.
That's astounding. So what do you think happens? I mean, it seems like the US at this point is at maybe we're already beyond the crossroads. What do you see it looking like in the next decade or so? What's happening?
I don't even give it a decade anymore. I think US has a couple of years left. Biden is actively destroying the US. They have opened up the border. They are going to give voting rights to millions of people. And all you needed was a couple of more million voters on the side of the woke people to entrench them in perpetuity. And this is the problem. Once you become irrational and once you lose track, you keep doing more and more wrong things to correct the prior wrongs. So welfare system destroyed the Black families, destroyed the, destroyed a lot of women, destroyed a lot of colored people, but we do more and more affirmative policy to correct the prior wrongs. So this is the problem with irrational people and irrational systems. They keep doing more and more wrong things to correct prior wrongs. And because the US is now in the control of morons, and woke culture is like termite, corroded the minds of a lot of bobos and young, even educated people in the US, because they are good people socially. They are on a face-to-face meeting. They are among the finest people. I love America, Matthew. I still spend more of my time in America than anywhere else. But the problem is that if you don't have the moral spine, you don't have honor, you don't have the concept of self-responsibility, your spine goes away and everything falls apart and everything else might be very good. And that's what I see happening in the US. The institutions are very corrupt. They will fall apart in a few years' time. I think America will fall apart eventually.
How? What's the catalyst that causes that? What's the I mean, there's a lot of catalysts maybe already, but what's the tipping point?
Well, you destroy your productive capacity. If America is no longer seen as a good place, all the good people who come to America today will stop coming to America. They will start going to Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong, and China, and that will be a huge loss for America. Then good people of America will start moving to East Asia, and once that process starts, this can snowball very quickly. But the problem is the institutions. America, I always thought America was a country where if you did a crime, you went to prison for a long time. And I completely agreed with that. And I think that should happen. If I come and go and slap someone, I should go to prison, because that is what the law should do. Now, for the last 1 year, people have been rioting, stealing stores. It actually makes police looks saint, because not a single case for which people rioted in the US was for a good guy. They were all criminals. And that shows how corrupt institutions have become in the US. This can very rapidly start happening the way I have seen things happening in India. India has more sustainable power because it has been a corrupt tribal system for forever. America hasn't been that way. So America does not understand how to exist in a tribal system. So things will fall apart very quickly. So Matthew, before we fixed up this call, I organized uninterrupted power supply for our conversation today. I did a lot of things here because nothing works here. Electricity goes off several times a day. There's water only for about half an hour a day. And that is this is the most posh area. This is a $2 million house. Here, water comes for only half an hour a day. And that is very lucky, if you're lucky. Elsewhere, people don't even get that. Things fall apart very quickly. What you take for granted can disappear in no time. Look at what happened in Texas. Look happened the forest fires in California. Look at what happened with MAX 737, the planes which fell off the sky. And I tell you, if you did a proper investigation, you would find that those things happened because of institutional corruption that has set in, mostly because of affirmative policy. You go to the government office today, and half of the people are, because they are either people of color or women or First Nations or whatever. They're not because of their merit, and they have corroded the institutions of the Western society hugely. And there's no going back, because not many people have the courage to say, hey, stop this affirmative policy. I just want to employ people on merit.
Well, that's one of the things that surprised me over the last year, that Americans have rolled over so easily to so much that's happened. I mean, how is that? What's your take on that?
Well, I have thought a lot about it, Matthew, because I have a lot of friends who write on social media, but except for one person, every single person uses a pseudonym to talk about things he wants to talk about. They are very afraid about talking about anything which can bring them under the cancel culture attack. So this is a huge fear among Western people today, particularly American. And now I have changed my views. I think America has less freedom of speech than China has, because in China, you can talk about all those things. I think one big problem why Western people have let this happen is because prosperity can easily make you lazy and too comfortable. And when you become too comfortable, you lose the capacity to fight for what is right, even though you understand what is right. And all my friends understand what is right, but they lose the capacity to fight. And I must confess, I don't have the capacity to fight. I have never held a gun in my hand, a loaded gun in my hand. So people lose that capacity to fight. They want to protect their a lifestyle rather than protect the culture of their society. And I think Western people have, because of prosperity, lost that. That has been the big problem. And Adam Ferguson, a Scottish philosopher, and Adam Smith actually as well wrote about it, that Western civilization will probably die because of prosperity that capitalism creates. Now, I don't know what is a way to correct that, but what I've seen, Matthew, is that East Asia, despite having become very rich, has not become comfortable. You go to Seoul, you go to Tokyo, at 6 in the evening, you will see crowds and crowds of young children in school uniform going for their tuitions, which means that they never return back home from schools. They continue working and studying and doing their extracurricular activities. So they have created a fake challenging system for their children rather than let it become too comfortable. I must say, however, that Western societies is still great. It's, people are very compassionate. Most people are very nice, and most people are very moral. But comforts can degrade the strength of your moral values.
Well, Doug and I need to take you to a gun range where you can hold and fire a loaded gun at some point. That's for sure.
That's right.
But we'll have to do it soon, Jayant, because that's one right that's going away from the US rapidly.
I am in San Francisco next week, Doug. So in 10 days, actually. So my first thought, my first plan is to go to a gun range to practice my first round of shooting.
I hope you do, because it's
excellent.
That the competency with a firearm makes you, makes you understand you don't think that firearms are the problem, basically, once you have competency around firearms. So good that you do that. What do you think about what you talk about different places in the world? Where is the place, if you could be anywhere in the world in the next decade or 2 decades, where would you want to be in order to have the most freedom, in order to have the most normal, high quality life with the moral compass that you talk about?
East Asia, Matthew, clearly East Asia. East Asia has preserved a lot of good aspects of the Western civilization. And every sign is that it will keep those good things for the next decade or so. They are not woke people. If you tell East Asians about the woke things happening in the US, they will laugh at it. And I'm sure Xi Jinping and his group, when he sits down in China to look at American TV about all the woke stupidities happening in the US, they laugh at it. Because they know that this society is on a suicidal path. It's so clear for Chinese to see that. I think East Asia is a very good place. A lot of my libertarian friends live in Singapore and China, and they feel very free and happy. And so I think that's where the future is for the next 10 days. I still absolutely love America. I love American culture. I spend a lot of time in America, but I would not want to become a legal resident of a Western society anymore.
Wow, that's a real wake-up call for Americans to hear the idea that places in East Asia, including China, might offer greater freedom over the next decade. That's shocking.
Matthew, given what has happened with the rapid ramping up of woke culture over the last couple of years, America, the freedom of speech in America is gone. Now you can talk all the good or bad things about food and vacation spots, but you say a word against that might sound like being against women or blacks, or you are finished. Your career is finished. No one will give you a job. Your friends and families will be afraid of you because they don't want to be seen with you anymore. And is not the case in China. In China, you can pretty much speak about absolutely everything, except that if you are very well known, you probably don't want to talk against the right of the CCP to run China. But does it really matter? I mean, I can bitch about Joe Biden as much as I want to. I can't change him. So that's the only restriction I may have in China. Although within dinner groups in China, people talk about Xi Jinping. They bitch about CCP, but they know that as practical people, my influence on central government is virtually negligible. So why waste time on it anyway?
Very interesting. So what do you think that Americans can do to, because obviously a lot of Americans are not going to relocate to China or anywhere else in East Asia. What can they do to edge out some freedom and some, moral compass still for themselves in America today?
So Matthew, if you look around the world, there are two kinds of people who have created civilizations or participated in civilizations building. People of North Europe and people of East Asia. The moment these people lose majority, particularly majority control over institutions, you can be absolutely assured that third world way of operations will kick in very quickly. America has brought in far too many people from the third world, and that is something you can no longer undo. America will be more than 50% of non-European extract within the next 5 or 10 years. So America has no hope as an entity. It could break down into smaller pieces, but that is not going to rescue the country, I think, because while the red states can be preserved for free-minded people, the problem is rich, spoiled white liberals also are increasingly moving to those places and destroying the democratic advantage that the right-wing thought has in those states. So I think America did a harakiri by importing too many people from the third world. And I must add, even too many intelligent people from the third world, because they might bring intelligence, but they do not bring Western values. They don't understand Western values of liberty and self-responsibility and honor.
Well, the U.S. did not make a mistake in allowing Jayant Bhandari to come into the country, though. I have to say.
US actually denied me a visa to go to the US in 1990. The reason why I went to the UK to study, they saw me as a possible immigrant. But again, I must say I absolutely love America. I did immigrate to Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen, and they allowed me in for the wrong reason, because they did not let me in for my values. They let me in because I could say yes to a few things.
Wow, interesting. Doug, what questions? As I've interrupted you a couple of times, what other questions do you have for Jayant while we've got him here?
Well, it's a real pleasure listening to Jayant. And I want to emphasize again that everybody that's listening to this now should go to Capitalism and Morality and dig up the speeches. Jayant gives one every year. I give every year, and all the speeches are absolutely along this line. So questions. I mean, I don't know, Jayant, this is totally off the topic, but it's one thing that you do for a living. Money, you're involved in the money business. So what would you do right now? Have any particular investment advice, ideas, thoughts?
Well, I certainly would want to keep spread my money around the world, particularly in East Asia, because East Asia is a very good place to keep your money. I would open bank accounts in East Asia, including in China. China is a very safe country from what I see. I still see Hong Kong as a great place. Hong Kong is no longer the same Hong Kong, but your money should be safe in these countries. Singapore is one of the best places on the planet. I would invest and keep my money in these countries. I would keep a good portion of my cash, at least 10% of my cash in precious metals, because a lot of these banking systems will fail, particularly in the Western world and in the third world. I tell my friends in India that they should get out of the banking system in India completely, because the banks in India will all crash. They are packed with non-performing assets. And people bitch about China all the time, but they don't see the problems with India, how tyrannical government is and how badly managed the banks in India are, for example. So, but I also like to invest while I can in the Western countries, and most of my investments are still in North America in the junior mining sector. But that's only because I was trained under Doug Casey and I learned the ropes of the business. And I do quite well investing in that business.
I know you have. Absolutely. Well, I don't know. Talk for hours. Listen, it's not a question of talking for hours. I could just listen to what you have to say with boots on the ground experience for hours. So.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, Jayant, I learned so much by having you here. Every time your name comes up with Doug, he gets a little smirk on his face, excited about you and the way that you are willing to say things that other people are not willing to say. And, you know, Doug, who's legendary for that, that says a lot about you. And we've seen some of that here tonight. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And I will put some links into the description of this video where people can find out more about you. You have jayantbhandari.com where you publish fairly regularly. You've got blog posts and you can sign up on his email list. I definitely encourage you to do that. His Twitter is also worth following. I'll link to all that in the description. Certainly your conference every year. Is that happening again this year, I assume?
No, because, well, I'm still hoping to do it in September, but Canadian government restricts all public gathering for now. And the hall that I rent has told me that government has told them that they will not be letting my seminar happen until the mid of September. And if I can't hold it in September, I can't hold it because then it starts getting cold and people won't want to come to Canada.
Yeah, Vancouver, summer and fall.
Assuming they aren't quarantined for 2 months when they come to Canada.
Yeah, well, so this is again a problem because Canada has become truly, truly woke. America still has so much of the freedom of culture, of freedoms. I have been to America 4 times in the last 1 year, and I'm going to America again in 10 days. And there's no restriction, no quarantine requirements, nothing that I could complain much about. But in Canada, if I went there, I would be in prison for 14 days. And I could still be beaten up by the, I could still get into trouble with the government later because of the lack of freedom of movement. Whereas in the US, you still have a lot of freedoms that Canada no longer has, because Canadian institutions have more of people from countries who don't understand the concept of liberty.
That's a very interesting point. I mean, one of the biggest things I'm taking away from this is the idea that wokeism is actually imported third world mentality. I hadn't considered that idea before, but that is a profound thought. So I really appreciate that. And I hope that one way or another, the Capitalism and Morality Conference happens this year. If you have to do it virtually, I know it's not the same, but it'd still be worth doing because the speeches, the speakers, and the content is just incredibly valuable. So I hope you figure out a way to make it work regardless of what the Canadian government does.
I will try my best.
All right. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Jayant. Super fun to have you here. I really appreciate it. And Doug, of course, thank you very much. We'll talk to you all later.
Right. Thanks very much, Matt. And thank you, Doug.
Absolutely.